right, please go ahead. You were talking about how you are focusing on the water affordability plan while all of this stuff is going on with the infrastructure and economic developments. So
Yes. So we're focusing on the water affordability plan is really the way it needs to be in order to address this. That if we don't talk about how it is that people cannot afford their bills based on their income, we're never going to get at the heart of the problem. People have said, well, what we need to just do are create more assistance programs, right? Because, people just need help with their bills. And so if we can find ways to fund programs and get people to donate to those programs or find sources of funding, then we'll be able to help people with getting assistance on their bill, and then they'll be able to, kind of move on from there. But the thing is with the assistance programs is they're based on this understanding that your problem is short term, right? And for a lot of people, that will be enough of a solution, right? You've lost your job temporarily, but you are someone who's able-bodied and well-informed enough that you can get another job. Or you've been in some kind of car accident, or you've had some kind of injury, but you're expected to recover. Or there's been just some other kind of short-term setback. For a lot of folks, if a family member dies, all this money that needs to go into burying people, even though we don't agree with that. But this is what people do, right? And so it's expected that if you just get some help on your bill temporarily, you'll be able to manage afterwards. But when we're talking about people who are poor, who are chronically poor, and are not going to get out of that situation, they're not just unemployed, but they're underemployed or they're unemployable. We're not going to get out of a situation where a one-time assistance payment on their bill is going to get them out of this problem. It's only going to temporarily pause that for 1 month, but then the next month they're in the same situation again, but now they're no longer eligible for assistance because most of the assistance programs will help you once per year. So then what do? And so this has been the problem, right? So now the bill gets bigger. You're now threatened again with shut off. And if you manage to figure out a way to scramble some money, you've only again reverted the problem for 1 month. Now you're back again. And so it's this kind of cycle. And so what you end up seeing are people whose water is off, then it might be back on, and then it's off again. Or some people who just can never get the money that the water department is demanding in order to be able to get the water from being shut off or turned back on. And so you have people who end up just living for significant amounts of time without water. And so they figure out ways to manage. And for some folks, we saw that when we were doing a lot of these home visits. You'd have neighbors who would allow the water hose to be run from their house over into the kitchen window of the neighbor next door. Or you'd see people who were telling us, they're like, well, there's actually this car wash down the street, and we just go there and we fill up buckets and we bring that water home. Or folks that, they'll go to the grocery store and you'll buy water. It hadn't really been back in those earlier years where people were buying the cases of water. You'd mostly see like those 3 gallons containers, those heavy ones, or the 1 gallon. It wasn't really until this whole like Nestle effect happened where we started seeing more of like the individual bottles. And so, so you'd hear the stories again about like, well, my daughter's coming over and she's going to bring some water for me. And I remember this one house. This was one of the early ones that I went to with Marion and Maureen. And I remember it happened to be a family that had contacted us and said that our water's off and we're not sure what to do and we can't afford the bills and, maybe you can come over and we'll talk to you more about it. They didn't really want to say a whole bunch on the phone. So we go over there, and I remember when we went into the house, there's this gentleman sitting on the sofa and he's watching TV but not really paying attention to us, and the wife is inviting us to go over into the kitchen. And so she starts telling us, our water's been off for a while. She's opening up the tap, nothing's coming out. And she's like, yeah, we've been like this for a while. Her husband is actually medical retirement as a police officer. He had gotten injured on the job and couldn't go back to work. And so they're living on these like retirement benefits, and it's not enough to pay for everything, his medical expenses, the housing costs, and the water. So they lose their water service, and she's telling us, but I still got to take care of him. He's got these daily needs I've got to attend to him for. I've got to still be able to do laundry and wash dishes. And so at night, I go out in front of the house and I turn on my water. I went to the hardware store and I bought one of those keys. So she goes out there and she turns it on at night, and then comes in and fills up buckets and toilets and washes and does things like that. And then before the light comes up, she goes back out and she turns it off again. She's like, so this way, nobody sees me. And then, I don't have to worry about the city trucks coming in the morning and trying to see if I did anything, And it actually had become kind of a common thing in these early years. A lot of people were doing that. Your water would get shut off. People knew if you went to the hardware store, you could buy one of these keys and turn your water back on. And so, that story was pretty shocking, because we're not expecting someone who's got like this good job, even though he went out in this kind of situation to have these kind of problems. But it highlighted for us that, this isn't just this typical, story of like the folks that we typically work with that have been in public assistance, that, middle class working folks, are directly impacted with these problems too. And what do you do again when you don't have water? So later on, when we started trying to figure out, all right, what are we going to do in a more kind of systematic way, we realized that we have to keep pushing the water affordability plan, but we've got to get more people to help with this. In those earlier years too, like I mentioned, we've been doing a number of protests. We were organizing with more groups who were concerned about these issues. And so several of those groups were also part of this formation of this People's Water Board. So they were a collection of, anti-poverty groups like us, environmental groups, labor unions. In fact, at the time, Ask Me Local, I think it's 207, they had been like really instrumental in teaching us a lot about what was going on with the water department itself, because those were the water workers, before there were any like contractors that were going off and shutting off people or turning them back on. It was the water employees who were the ones that would go to people's homes, and they were the ones that really knew the neighborhoods. They knew the residents, because they'd be out there, reading the meters, or they'd go out there and be told like, hey, go check on this family, their water's going to get shut off. And those workers actually had like some discretion, like you'd go up to the house and they were like, you haven't paid your bill, and they're telling me to come shut you off. And someone would be like, I promise I'll go pay today, just don't shut me off. And they'd be okay. And they'd say, all right, I'll come back in a couple days and we'll see how it's going. And so, there were those kinds of relationships, and there was more of a community understanding and awareness of how it is that, some neighborhoods, some communities might be struggling more than others. And you got to know the customers too. That was the other thing. It wasn't like this anonymous thing, because this is an essential city service, right? And so, they more and more started also finding that their work was being contracted out. And so, like I said, we would go to those water department meetings with the Board of Commissioners, and we would see, because they have the big agenda, and you'd see like all this list of all these contracts that are being approved for, millions of dollars. And we're not understanding like, why are they paying this company to do that work? Why are they like, this is what the water department employees do. That's what the union does. Why are they outsourcing this stuff? And little by little, the effort to try to break the union and to try to say, we can't afford to pay public employees to do this. Instead, we can get these contractors who have bid for less, and we're going to have them do it. So this is also what's going on in these same years. And so as we built this like early coalition with these other groups, we're trying to figure out, all right, how is it we prioritize around this water affordability plan? How is it that we get more visibility for these water quality issues that we're learning about, especially from some of the environmental groups? The runoff of this combined sewer system that we have. So the sewer plus raw sewage stuff, then the overflow that's going into the rivers, and learning about the EPA and this whole order that we were under, because I guess the city had been in violation of Clean Water Act things, and we had this federal judge who was overseeing the system, and the water department couldn't make decisions unless they were approved by this judge. We're like, we don't know what all this stuff is, but we're learning it along the way. We're like, well, why does this matter? Why is he even inserting his nose in, So we're learning about how these things matter and how they're supposedly impacting the decisions the city can or cannot make, and how they impact our water bills, and why it is that we have so much, stuff running into the river and the fish, and so all these things are going on. We're like, well, we really are really focusing on like water affordability, right? And the people that are calling us with that problem. So we get more and more into this stuff, and we're trying to understand it. And then 2014 actually became like a pretty pivotal year. So the conversations have already been happening about how it is that other customers in the system don't believe what Detroit is saying about the water rates, and they're challenging it and want to have this voice and this vote. So the work is going on about how in order to save the Detroit water system, we've got to regionalize it. You get more players, you get more people who are interested in the operational needs, the overall cost of distributing the cost, that there might be a way to manage this better, So we know that it's really a power grab, right? As Detroit folks know, this is a power grab. The regions want, control of this, and we believe it's like the first step towards privatization. So what had been also growing on in Detroit here is this growing public-private partnerships for everything, right? The land, the development, almost everything here. I think we've probably got more authorities than we actually do have like government entities, right? But they operate off of this premise that, we're going to operate with kind of like a business framework, but we're going to use tax dollars to do it, public dollars to do it, and they don't operate with the same kind of transparency or disclosure that you would expect from anything that's being publicly funded. And so we knew that this was going to be dangerous also for this new authority with the water department. So in 2014, March of that year, that's when the DWSD had said, we're implementing this new program. If you are $150 behind or 2 months behind in your bill, your water will be shut off. No real forewarning about it, no addressing of the other problems that have been going on in terms of the incorrect bills, the excessive bills, the other like plumbing issues, other infrastructure issues, because there's still been like with all these abandoned houses across the city, so many houses with their water running, and we would report them and we'd say, look, we'd take photos and say, look, this house down that block has had water running on for a year. Residents have been telling you, and we know that all that water that's running off and going into the sewer, you end up billing back to Detroit residents. And that's not fair either, but you're not doing your responsibility to, take care of this kind of problem. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where were we on?
No, you're basically talking about how you were engaging DWSD and all of these authorities. Can you tell us?
Oh, right, 2014.
Yeah,
sorry.
2014. Yeah, and regionalization and
yes.
WA and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about your partnerships with other coalitions and other organizations, and how are those coalitions sort of evolving? How are they how are they sort of going forward, and what kind of work are you doing with them?
Sure. So we are Michigan Welfare Rights again is an anti-poverty organization, and so the partnerships that we have formed have largely been around other kinds of grassroots or social movement groups, and so over the years, a lot of the intersections that we've had are people that are also working on these like struggle issues, the denial of some kind of basic resource or need that people have, housing, food, healthcare, and so on, or justice issues, right, about like racism or sexism, sexual orientation, and such. So especially in those early years when we were trying to understand more about like the water stuff, it was some of these groups were actually telling us also about what was going on up in central Michigan. And so we didn't really understand anything that was going on with this new Nestle plant that was being built. And we didn't really even know where Mecosta County was, kind of in our like urban ignorance. But we're hearing about that, Nestle's come to Michigan and they're building this plant and it's a big problem. They promised all these jobs, but, they're not delivering. And instead, what they're doing is extracting like thousands and thousands of gallons of water and they're putting it in bottles to resell. And this is a huge problem because they're paying virtually nothing for it. At the time, Governor Granholm had approved, I think what was on the books, the permit was only about $200. And, folks were outraged. Like, they're getting these thousands of gallons of water to bottle, and you're shutting off people here for less than $200. This doesn't make any sense. And so we're announcing these kinds of things at the protests that we're having in front of the water department. These other activists are going up there and they're learning more, and they're protesting up there at the Nestle plant. And so we're starting to like learn more about like these inequities. And we're saying, look, this is not only not fair, but we want to know like how it is that corporations get away with these things when you're coming after residents in these other ways. And so it was kind of those early organizing stages where we started building those relationships, and that's where we also started getting involved with like some of the environmental groups. We're also trying to help us with some of what they saw, like some of the connections, and we're interested also in these issues about why is it so many people in Detroit, Highland Park are having their water shut off. And so that's where we, started meeting more with folks like Sierra Club, Clean Water Action, Food and Water Watch, Public Citizen. And I remember like we were also like really trying to get data from the water department and just tell us like how many people have you actually shut off, and they wouldn't tell us. And so I remember the time Public Citizen out in DC had actually put in a FOIA, and they were able to get the data. And that's when we learned there was like over 40,000 homes that had been shut off. And we were floored. We're like, oh my gosh, we knew it was a problem, but we didn't realize how big of a problem it was. And so that also helped us with starting to get out more of like the visibility, like that this is a serious issue going on in Detroit, right? So the partnerships have really been like around how it is that people have also aligned around this issue. Like it's one of the things that's been a problem I think over the years is that especially for environmentalists, the focus has been largely on like the Great Lakes, the streams, the rivers, and how it is that we protect the ecology of those waters and make it so that people have safe places to boat and swim and fish. And yes, all great stuff because we all want those things when we can get out there. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we've got clean drinking water. And so we've got these, these health standards and the EPA, the things that they're supposed to be responsible for, and Michigan Department of Environmental Quality is supposed to ensure happens with our water systems. But what do you do about the fact that people don't have water? There wasn't anyone that was really looking at that, and instead this became one of those issues where they're saying, well, this is really a household problem. There's something about that household that they've got to figure out. You've got to figure out how to get a job. You've got to figure out how it is you pay your bills, because clearly that's probably you don't want to pay your bills. That's really the underlying story, right? And that you've got to figure out, who can help you. If you just get some help, then you'll be able to manage again. But we kept saying, look, none of that is working. And that's not the real story here. Yes, for some people who are able to get a job, they'll do that. Some people who are able to deal with a short-term problem on their water bill, they'll manage that. But for a lot of people who are chronically poor, who don't have the ability to go to work, who have disabilities, or whose children have disabilities, and they've got to figure out how to take care of those the needs of their children at home, we're not going to be able to sort of assistance our way out of that or administer our way out of that. These are more chronic conditions that we've got to address. So the water shutoffs became this way that we could talk about these issues of poverty, but at the same time, people didn't want to hear about those issues of poverty. And that's been one of the ongoing struggles in this. And so in some ways, it's helped to also kind of define the partnerships we're going to have. Because some people will be on board with that and say, yes, these are some real justice, equity, moral, ethical issues. And others are like, yeah, that's not really where we're at. We think this is about personal responsibility, or we think this is about economic issues that we're not really prepared to get into, or that's not really where we're at. We're interested more in about the health and welfare of water systems, right? Ecology. So we're like, all right, well, at least we understand where we're at, who our partners and allies are, and who they're not. Just don't work against us, right? So the thing is that whenever you're advocating for poor people's issues, you know that there's going to be a whole line of argument against why that can't work. And that's been part of the struggle, I think, that we've had even with the water affordability plan, because we've continued to say has to be income-based, has to be income-based. And even though we don't like to admit it, because we think it just causes more political problem, we, will regularly say that if your income is zero, then your water bill is zero. That's just the way it is, right? And if your income happens to go up the next month and now you've got $100, okay, well, what's 2% of $100? That's now your bill. But they were flexible to say that, look, these life circumstances are going to be with some aspects of our population forever until we address these larger economic issues. Until then, we cannot say that people cannot have this basic resource for life when we know without it you will die in a matter of days. And it's not only unjust, but it's not even like something that as like society as we have determined that we want to do to any portion of our population. That's why we built these water systems, to make sure that people had water wherever it is that they were living. Or if you didn't have that, you could at least have the ability to dig a well. Because we've talked about that in Detroit. We're like, okay, well, if they're going to shut off your water, let's dig a well. You know, we'll help you get your own water source. But it's illegal, right? So you can't do that. So it's not as if we can even say, well, like a telephone company, well, if you're going to shut me off, that's all right. I'll go to this other company and I'll get my service restored there. It's a monopoly at the same time. So it's not as if we even have choices. So, there's lots of things that have made it so that people cannot really exercise real options. So what we've been saying is, look, the partnerships that we form, yes, are important for the larger political messages we need, but what we really need is to figure out how it is that we reshape the whole way in which it is that we interpret who deserves and who is undeserving, because that's part of the problem here. So they're really political in many ways. It's not as if this is any scientific argument that anyone is saying, well, some people can live without water, It's not even anything like that. And for a lot of people who have some sort of like faith orientation, their beliefs have them also believe that water is fundamental to life and you need it, and it's practiced in lots of religions and cultural practices, right? And so we need it for lots of other reasons. But when we start looking more closely at how it is that water matters to us as societies, as communities, then that's when we start looking at the issues around public health. And I think that that's probably one of the areas that people have actually started to pay attention. And sadly, people might not care about my individual health in my household, whether or not I have water and the problems I will experience it. But if it now impacts your public health, when I have to then go out and, participate at school, participate in work, then my issues become something that could impact your well-being. And we've tried to say that, look, it's important for us all to have these healthy spaces, that hygiene and proper sanitation are important for everyone, but I don't think that we understand like how it really matters for all of us. And instead we've become sort of too oriented into these really individualistic ways of approaching the issues instead of like what is really good for our collective well-being. And that's kind of one of the ways that we're trying to push the issues around water as well.
What gives you the most hope in terms of where this movement is headed, in terms of what can be done when you look around you and you see all the different ways that people are involved in this issue? What gives you hope? Do you hope?
Yeah, for sure. I'm one of these folks that believe that the majority of people are good. Majority of people want to work together. People have the interests of other, close to their own heart because, we're all interconnected. That it's really, there's a huge power imbalance. And so how is it that by numbers we can do something to shift that imbalance? One of the hard things around this though is that like we're so heavily oriented into this belief that we live in this democracy that can be affected if we just rally enough of us to vote or get enough of us to show up, at a city council meeting, that we can sway enough people over to our beliefs. And it just does not happen enough. In fact, when it does happen, we're like so excited. We're like, oh, we want something. But then we might lose it the next month, for something else that happens. And that's the thing, is that like we don't want to have to give up on that belief that our democracy is broken, but in many ways it is, and it's being intentionally done so. And so then what options do we have, in order to be able to change it? So we're trying to figure out how to work within the system, but at the same time the system is so broken that we almost need like a complete overhaul, a complete transformation of how it is that we interpret what it is that we need to do in order to get the things we need to live. And so, yes, the least vulnerable among us are always going to suffer the worst. And that's part of like what we're trying to do in this water activism, is to say, look, at the very essence of this, we've got to protect the least among us, and hoping that like those stories will like help transform others. When we tell the stories of, you know, the pregnant moms without water, or the senior who just came home from the hospital and now she's got to attend to these wounds but doesn't have, you know, water that she can open from the tap to, you know, wash off her wound before she puts on some new bandages, or people who have communicable diseases, you know. And we don't want to be in a society where we have like lepers and we're like, oh, just leave them in the house, they can't come out. No, that's ridiculous. We want to be able to embrace people, and we want people to live healthy, happy lives, but we're creating these kind of like systems where people are being blamed for their own experience when it has nothing to do with them. Like the person that had the $29,000 bill, that was not their responsibility that it ever got that high, really, right? That should have been addressed long time ago before it ever got to be like that. And now you've burdened this person with something they'll never be able to get out from under. And you've created a whole other host of situations that now have made it so that person is going to struggle in other ways, whether or not they can keep their housing, keep their job, go to school, whether their children are going to be able to be cared for properly, you know, lots of other like individual health problems from the anxiety and the stress of that kind of, you know, burden. And so we're saying, look, there's so much that we've got to deal with, you know, just in this capitalist system, that at the very least, we've got to figure out the simplicity and the complexity of water so that we can make sure that we've all got it. And again, like the immense contradictions of living here in Michigan has made it all the more like earnest. And like we're saying, look, if we can't solve that here, we're in so much more depth of problems in other places, right? And in some ways, like we almost have the problems worse here than we do in other places, you know, not only with the shutoffs and the affordability problems, but the contamination in Flint and Benton Harbor and other places across the state with lead and PFAS. And it's almost like, what is happening to Michigan in terms of water, you know, and why is it that we don't have enough like voice of reason and power to be able to say, look, we've got to just put everything on hold and get control over what's happening to our immense natural resource here. But at the same time, while we're struggling for this basic issue of how it is that we access water and the crisis of its contamination, we've got these corporations that are coming in here, you know, to bottle it, that are taking over our small family farms, and that are, you know, building these huge, you know, agro businesses, and the water's plentiful, and, you know, but then we've got communities of people who are just like, I don't know what to do. I don't even want to drink this water. I'm so scared. So we've got these huge imbalances in Michigan, yet we've got these huge responsibilities at the same time, because we know that other folks are saying across the nation, across the world, you know, we really want to know what you all are doing. You know, what's happening in Detroit and Flint has really impacted other places, and people are saying, we're paying attention to this water affordability plan. We're paying attention to the ways you guys are resisting and demanding the water that you need for life, and your struggles are mattering to ours. And so, you know, when we talk about like international water warriors, you know, that's actually good to know that there are other people that feel like the stuff that we're doing is matter, because a lot of times, you know, we sort of feel like we're not really making any kind of difference, but at the same time, like it just shows like how this problem is so immense and is just growing, and that we've really got this responsibility to hold the line in ensuring that our most vulnerable people have this resource, while also holding accountable these other folks who are coming in for the big power water grab. So there's, yeah, a lot to determine.
I think we're good.
I think you're out of time, aren't you?
We are like dangerously out of time, but I'll just ask you one last question.
Uh-huh.
Because you've told me a lot about the story of water insecurity and affordability in Detroit, and the story of Michigan, and the story of Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. Tell me about your story. your personal story in terms of how did how did you get involved with NWRO? And I know you are also working on your PhD program, for instance. So tell me a little bit about your journey as a person.
Let's see, how did I get into this? I moved to Michigan in 1995 to go to graduate school from Los Angeles. And yeah, I come from a working class background. You know, my dad was a truck driver. My mom mostly a homemaker. I got like 2 sisters and a brother. And, you know, I didn't think I'd really ever leave like California, you know. But an opportunity came up and I was just like, yeah, I'm going to take it, you know. Scared, never really been at a like state like that at all. So lots of culture shock, really, you know, coming to Michigan. So, you know, I was lucky that I had like a good cohort of, you know, other people I was with and, you know, met some good people on campus. And then in the course of like my work, one of the faculty members I was working with was like, hey, I've got this project community thing, this social service learning program for undergraduates, and we've been doing like a lot of social service-y kinds of placements. And I think I would like to see about doing something where there might be more social change opportunities. He's like, why don't you go find some people or some groups and then let me know what you come up with. So I actually came across this flyer that talked about this Empty Bowls campaign. And in one of the groups that was a co-sponsor was this group called Washington Welfare Rights. And they were going up to Lansing and they were going to take all these empty bowls and tell the legislature how like low-income families are hungry and this is something that they typically experience, you know, not having anything really to eat, or they have to share one bowl of food with, you know, family. And so, you know, I thought, well, you know, they sound pretty interesting. I'm going to go check them out. So I met them, and they actually had an office over in one of these public housing communities in Ypsilanti. And then I started doing some volunteer work with them, and it turned out that this faculty member agreed, like, yeah, let's make them one of the placements. So we had some undergrads there, and, you know, would get involved in some of the different activities they had. Some of the protests, we would go over to the, you know, the local welfare office and protest with them. And then later I got introduced to the folks here in Detroit with Michigan Welfare Rights. And then that kind of was like the hook and sinker. So like I was doing the work, working on my dissertation. Actually, I was working still on the prospectus for my dissertation. And it ended up being this. So I was doing this participatory research with welfare rights. But then I just sort of just continued into the ongoing work and kind of got away from the dissertation. So, yeah, I've been working with welfare rights since '96.
Well, thank you for your work and your service.
Yeah, thanks.